So good afternoon, good morning, and good evening, everyone. Welcome to the 2021 APRU Sustainable Cities and Landscapes webinar series. So today's session is our second webinar in our series. So thank you so much for joining us. And before we get started today's webinar, I just want to mention a couple of things about APRU and our Sustainable Cities and Landscapes Hub program. So for those of you who are not familiar with APRU, first of all, APRU is the Association of Pacific Rim Universities, which is a network of 60 leading universities linking the Americas, Asia, and Australasia. And we leverage collective education and research capabilities of our members into the international public policy process. The Sustainable Cities and Landscapes program is one of the APRU's primary research programs to collaborate on effective solutions to the challenges of the 21st century. And so the SCL Hub has 17 core member universities, including the University of Auckland, across the Pacific Rim, and the hub is housed at the University of Oregon, USA. So the SCL Hub successfully held 4 annual conferences in Portland, Hong Kong, Sydney, and Auckland, with a total of 450 participants. And each participant, we offer various activities that students can participate in, such as research working groups, design field school, and a student design competition, and a research symposium for PhD students. And our 2022 conference is scheduled in Honolulu, Hawaii. So stay tuned and I hope you can participate. And this year, instead of our annual conference, we offer a live webinar series organized by our working groups, celebrating our 5th year anniversary since we were established in 2016. So starting from mid-August, there will be 10 bi-weekly thematic webinars until mid-December this year. So after today's webinar on smart cities, the next webinar will be organized by the University of Oregon and CBSA, entitled Urban Sanitation and the Sustainable Development Goals, the Role of Container-Based Sanitation, on September 13th for Americas, 5 p.m. in Pacific time, which is September 14th, 12 p.m. in New Zealand time, and 8 a.m. in Hong Kong. So I hope you continue to join us and explore how cities and regions across the Pacific Rim address the climate change and social equity to achieve the sustainable development goals. So please contact us through email and visit our website and Facebook and Instagram if you are interested in participating in our activities. Yeah, thank you so much.
Thanks very much, Yifang, for your insightful information about the APRU and also regarding to the activities we are doing. Actually, this event is organized also by University of Auckland in collaboration with APRU and also especially Future Cities Hub at the School of Architecture and Planning. So the first speaker here would be Associate Professor Manfredo Manfredini, and he will speak about digital space and urban design. Manfredo, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you to all of you. Thank you for inviting me and actually organizing this beautiful series of webinars, and also to create those opportunities to have in such a gap year the way of getting the hub still running and giving a possibility really to contribute with our research to a better say future of the hub itself, and also contribute to the addressing the problem that the hub looks at. So without further ado, because I have only 10 minutes, I will try to run this 100 meters of 10 minutes telling about exactly this particular topic that wasn't just mentioned. And if you can you see my screen? Is my screen coming through?
Yeah.
Okay. So, and as said, this is a research I've done on this particular question of understanding what is happening in a transition in which not only we have a major measure disruptive changes, but at the same time, we have incredible new opportunities. And this affirmatively reading deterritorialization exactly because deterritorialization is a phenomenon that has been discussed in many ways in various areas, particularly drawing upon the work of De Luz and Guattari, but particularly in the area of urbanism, and is becoming quite interesting in association to other ideas like the question of assemblage thinking. Now, just to give a sense of what I'm doing, I work in a comparative conjunctional urbanism area, which is an approach to study of cities that focus on their intercultural and transnational relationship and aims to recognize common trends and differences, acknowledging that each city is characterized by a peculiar history and condition. The focus of my research is that presenting today is the structural transformation of the social spatial relationality, of course, in urban space. And I'm looking at three particular elements. One is the uneven resilience of the social body that is driven by an unrelenting acceleration of the entire life world and produce a general desynchronization with progressive loss of relationality and objective alienation. This loss, though, is unevenly distributed as only dominant actors can counter it by creating conditions of dynamic stabilization grounded in their cultural dominance. The second element is the unsustainable development of the city that sees our city subject to a growing penetration of market forces fostered by neoliberal regimes with the implementation of ultra-extractive urbanism models that advance universal commodification and the annihilation of urban commons. And the third one is the expanding contradiction of our mode of production and consumption, but also consumption, after Ritzer, that is led by digitally empowered dominant systems. Such systems engage with all levels of social and cultural practices to transform the individual into exploitable, algorithmically resolved individual. The exploitation, however, produces major internal conflicts in the system. And the system, as it is based, the exploitation, on a radical divestment with externalization of the means of production. The consequent distribution of this fixed capital, so means of production, among the producer consumers or the consumers themselves, for example, through personal digital devices or collectively produced software, empowers them, offering them an unprecedented emancipatory potential. And the study area in which I apply my research is public space. Why? Well, like squares, parks, community centers. But because public space are crucial to a crucial urban component affected by the structural transformation of relationality, they constitute the key spatial infrastructures that ensure in place social interaction for sharing on common resources and common actions. But particularly looking at privatized public spaces for the reason I mentioned earlier, for instance, shopping malls, which are the best representation of the pervasion of market forces in urban space and operate as prime means for universal commodification and annihilation of commons in urban space. But specifically, I'm even more interested in privatized public space with what I call pseudo-civic commercial functions. For example, the all-encompassing shopping center, such as the so-called mini cities, which are now becoming the mainstream in this particular area of the development of the city centers, of commercial city centers. These centers are the best expression of the contradiction of the financialized publicness, as they are commercial enclosures, central places of financial extractivism that cannot support the sustained instances of sharing and commoning that characterize the genuine public space. Now, this is the research I'm presenting, and exactly what is happening, whatever happens, is the question that Colas asked on urbanism back in time, and I rephrased it. What is happening to these pseudo-civic commercial centers that are already centers in which the public space is negated, when in particular situation like COVID-19, they are outright negated. So, and I started looking at what was happening in New Zealand exactly during the first lockdown, and we have a four-tier system of restrictions. And we were in that case on level 4, which means a stay-at-home order with all this kind of regulation that we all know. And what I was noting is, of course, that the virus here, as everybody probably is aware, dropped quite instantly after the lockdown. But what was happening is something that was quite interesting, because if you look at what was happening in terms of infection, you find that the spread was among the young people, was among those that are of a particular ethnicity. Here in Auckland, 30% about of the young population is of European descent, and those are the ones mostly affected, and in particular the ones that have the highest income group and the highest income group, and where it was actually concentrated in Auckland, as you can see here. So I started looking at what these people were doing, where these people were doing, and what are the centers. So if you look at the center, the spatial plan we have in Auckland is based on this document, which is actually in the Auckland plan, which is the future vision for the development of Auckland, that identifies Auckland as a polycentric city, which we have 9 metropolitan centers, the one with the large dots. And in these metropolitan centers, something is happening. If you look at the one I highlighted in white, in yellow, are the ones, those are the ones that are what I call mold, which means that essentially they concentrate all the amenities in one single building, which is a shopping mall, open or closed that it is. Now, the problem is that malls are undergoing a very major change. And we know, for instance, in the US, on every second day, one is getting closed. But what is happening is that something is actually a game changer here. And it is exactly the metamorphosis of that system that are no longer for shopping, but are for something else, socialization, entertainment, and other things that have to do more with our everyday practices in the society. And what is interesting is that most of them now are trying to propose themselves in a different way, which is what I call pseudo-civic, a form of pseudo-civicness. It was a poster we used at Habitat 3 in Quito a few years ago to show how we have now branded the town squares here in Auckland. That's a case of a center in the west, in the east of our metropolitan area. So to make this research viable, and I was looking now at a particular form of engagement that I will tell you in a second, I looked at 2 malls that represent exactly 2 types. So the old one, which is the big box, and the second one, which is exactly the so-called civicness. So one will be St. Luke's, which is the modern one, and then the other one is called Sylvia Park, which is exactly an ultra-modern, or in other words, the pseudo-civic. That's a classic one, the modern that has the classic consumerist heterotopia, so a completely other place, completely enveloped, introverted, and completely subject to animation and continuous eventful organizational events. And that's the other one, the so-called pseudo-civic, in which we see that we start seeing plazas, we start squares, or pseudo-squares, lanes, and green areas right at the center of the mall. So those are the 2 models, and we started looking at them, but those are models that this is a plan, official plan of Auckland, in which you see the urban infrastructure and what the social infrastructure, and what you see that in both centers, St. Luke's and Sylvia Park, there's hardly any social amenities. So looking at one of them, you see what is happening. And what is happening is here that one of them, which is Sylvia Park, the ultra-modern, has a very peculiar characteristic. And you see the mall is the one in black that in our plan now is identified as a metropolitan center, which is quite weird because, of course, this is actually just a shopping mall. And it's the way in which it fragments the city is quite obvious. And I'm just using this image to show how that fragmentation reaches an absolute extreme level in a case like this one, in which right at the center of the center, you have sidewalks that takes you nowhere, literally nowhere. So don't gather much for the population. So during the lockdown, of course, it was deserted. The only open facility was the supermarket. Well, actually, it was also a pharmacy. And what was happening there? Well, we started looking at Instagram. And what we found in Instagram? Well, we found something very strange, which is because Instagram, we work on Instagram because it's geolocated and particularly visually based. So we are very interested in the image of the city. We saw that, as you can see here, the first bar indicates the 33 days, 33 days is the length of the lockdown. And the second bar indicates the 33 days of the lockdown. What you see is that the interaction, the overall interaction, Instagram, actually declined only by 10%. In the other one, the old kind of mall, what we call modern, actually, as expected, interaction declined dramatically. What that means? It means that actually networks in the first case are still working, in the other one just collapse as retail collapses. Now, of course, looking at the details, what you see is that there is a huge drop in posts because people could not go there, could not make posts in both cases. But when you look at how people responded, so with both comments and likes, you see an incredible difference between the two malls. So the first one actually was a mall in which the networks established on those particular places in place in the mall were still operating. In the second one was actually deceiving. And we did some research on communities and interaction. We cannot go into detail now. But what was particularly important is when we entered in the content analysis. What we do in the content analysis, now we try to do it with some automated system, but anyway, this was done manually because the number of posts was quite limited. A particularly interesting thing, which is absolutely uncommon, is that a large majority, 83% of the posts were particularly meaningful in terms of their spatial content. Usually what you see is what you see on the top left hand, which is cappuccinos or goods that people buy in the shopping mall. But if you break it down more, you see that the majority of this particular group is actually constituted by particular moments that people want posted during the lockdown of their experience embedded in that place. And that's particularly meaningful because all of a sudden you realize that there's a complete counterforce which is developing within the mall, and that this counterforce is actually resilient to those particular dramatic disruptions. So, and that is it from me. I think I made it.
Thank you very much, Manfredo, for your interesting presentation. I really appreciate that. Actually, for information of the audiences, we'll have a Q&A after all presentations, so you can ask your questions through the Q&A, applications and in the platform. So after all presentations, so we have around half an hour to ask the questions, if you have any. Thanks, Manfredo. Thank you very much for your interesting presentation. I appreciate that. So the next presentation and speaker is Professor Ali Chishmezangi. He's head of the Department of Architecture and Built Environment at the University of Nottingham, Ningbo, China, and also he's a director of the Center for Sustainable Energy Technologies. So Ali, floor is yours. So we are. Thank you very much, Ali, for your interesting presentation. And sorry for the technical issues, and especially regarding the voice. That sounds very interesting topic and area, especially the COVID and the post-COVID era, how we can actually deal with this ongoing problem. Thank you very much, Ali, for your presentation. So again, remind you guys, if you have any question for Ali, you can ask it after presentations in the Q&A session we have at the end. So the next speaker is Associate Professor Ayub Sharifi, and from University of Hiroshima. And so he's of the Graduate School of Humanities and Social Science and Network for Education and Research. And so floor is yours, Ayub, for your interesting presentation. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Mohsen. Thank you very much for the invitation. Also would like to thank the other organizers, the ECAN, and also the others. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be with you today. Today I would like to talk a little about contributions of smart cities to pandemic resilience. So I also need to acknowledge that this is a work I've done with my colleague Amir, but he's not with us today. One important thing and a distinct feature that makes COVID unique is that it occurred in an era of increased connectivity driven by information and communication technologies. So because of that, we thought it would be a good idea to see how these technologies have contributed to better resilience to the pandemic. And also this pandemic has provided, in fact, additional momentum to smart city research, given the potential utility of smart solutions for dealing with the crisis. So when we talk about resilience, of course, there are lots of definitions, but here we would like to emphasize on a very simple and straightforward definition, which divides resilience into four major stages. One is planning and preparation. This is something which often is done before an adverse event occurs. Then we have absorption. These are efforts that are done in the immediate aftermath of a disaster or an adverse event to reduce the overall losses. Then we also have recovery to return to the equilibrium situation, and finally adaptation to make sure that we have better performance in the future based on the lessons that are learned. So based on this four stages, we try to distill 10 different contributions, overall contributions from the literature. So this was based on literature review. The first one is planning and preparation. So what we noticed is that there are three major contributions. One is preparing and providing smart city infrastructure that could lead to better performance in the future. Then this preparation also can facilitate collaborative and integrated planning and management. Also using smart technologies for forecasting and prediction and for identifying hotspots is something that contributes to better planning. So just for instance, for the preparation, planning and preparatory activities taken before the occurrence of adverse events may affect the abilities to respond and recover. So this also has implications for the other stages. Also, there have been some cities that have done better preparation, leading to relatively better response. So this is particularly those cities in East Asia and Southern Asia, which based on lessons that they've learned from previous epidemics, they have tried to make better preparations using the smart technologies. So for instance, some cities have repurposed some of their existing smart city infrastructure to facilitate improved response abilities. These are something like urban control and command centers, which were repurposed immediately after the emergence of the pandemic to facilitate surveillance and also for tracing and tracking of infected individuals. So this has been done again in Asia, also in Indian cities, in Rio de Janeiro, also in Newcastle, which has a famous urban observatory. Then for facilitating collaboration, we know that smart solutions can facilitate cooperation between different sectors for timely response, recovery, and also this has been evidenced to be effective in different places like China, South Korea, and Singapore. This is important because oftentimes different sectors operate in silo-based manner. So if we have this kind of smart technologies based on their utilities, it would be able to, it would be possible to have more integrated responses, which would be, of course, more rapid and timely. Also, using smart technologies for forecasting and prediction is important. For instance, various IoT and AI-based technologies have contributed to data collection to identify potentially infected individuals, and through that, they have contributed to better responses. So this is just some illustration how these different technologies may contribute to better resilience. Of course, this is not comprehensive, and I don't go into the details due to the time limitations. But for instance, here we can see that urban command and control centers can contribute to better surveillance, better tracing, and also to more real-time responses. In terms of absorption, absorption again refers to the ability to minimize functionality loss in the immediate aftermath of a disruptive event. This could be achieved in 3 different ways. One, through preventive measures to control the spread of the virus, through tracing and tracking of infected individuals, and also through facilitating transparent communication and preventing the spread of fake news. For the first one, for instance, we've seen that AI-based technologies have been developed that can detect positive cases based on body temperature and also common respiratory systems such as coughing or sneezing. And there are also other gadgets, for instance, or other functions that can be used for this purpose. In terms of tracing and tracking, contact tracing can be done through smart solutions that rely on a variety of spatiotemporal data collected from different sources such as mobile network providers, transportation cards that allow access to origin destination data, Bluetooth-based methods, QR methods, credit card transactions, and so on. And again, in different contexts, in different countries, these methods have proven to be very effective, although they have led to some concerns about privacy. Also, the other one is facilitating transparent communication. Again, this is very important because, for instance, through machine learning techniques, we can avoid the spread of misinformation. For instance, Google and Facebook, they used such techniques to detect and defect and also delete misinformation. Again, the urban observatories can also contribute to this function. Once again, this is just an illustration. I can share the slides later that if you're interested, you can gain more information about this. In terms of recovery, this refers to any measures that enable communities to return to the pre-shock state in a timely manner. And these efforts can, of course, contribute to better recovery. There are 2 major themes here. One is through providing support to the overstretched staff, and also through providing alternative means to ensure continuity of basic functions. For providing support to overstretched staff, we saw that many hospitals around the world, for instance, have reported shortages of necessary resources such as medical staff, ventilators, and so on. And through automated systems, it has been possible to compensate for some of these issues. For instance, smart robots have been widely used to compensate for the shortage of medical staff by replacing humans. And also another important function is providing alternative means to ensure continuity of basic functions. And most importantly, here I can highlight the supply chain disruptions that were minimized by using smart technologies, and that facilitated better service delivery And there are many examples from around the world on how smart technologies have contributed to this. In terms of adaptation, which is the last stage, this refers to the ability to learn from an adverse event in order to enhance the operation of the system and also its capacity to deal with similar or more severe events in the future. So two important issues can be highlighted here. One is accelerating transition towards digitalization. So this could be kind of adaptation issue, and also offering lessons to optimize city operations in the future. So in terms of accelerating transition, the pandemic has brought to the fore some of the hidden or less known advantages of technical initiatives and has provided opportunities for real-world implementation of transformative smart city initiatives. So in a sense, it has really accelerated transition towards smart cities. And this acceleration can be interpreted as an adaptation strategy adopted by many businesses around the world that has allowed them to deal with the crisis. In terms of lessons for optimizing city operations, evidence shows that cities equipped with 5G technology have been more successful in combating the pandemic through innovative solutions such as telemedicine, teleworking, and also smart surveillance. And these insights and experiences offer a strong reason for cities to increase their ICT infrastructure investment in the post-COVID period. So again, here I just wanted to highlight some of these important utilities of smart technologies, but we should not forget the issues about, for instance, privacy, issues of digital divide that could be barriers for proper implementation of these technologies. But I just wanted to highlight some of their utilities. So if you're interested, I would like to refer you to this article for more information about the results. Again, thank you very much for your attention. And if there are any questions or comments, I look forward to hearing them. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ayub, for your interesting presentation. And also, I really enjoyed it because it's quite relevant to my research area as well. And especially the last point you mentioned, that regarding social digital divide, and also regarding to the privacy, it's a kind of the things we need to consider and become more challenging. Thank you very much for your presentation. And yeah, thanks, Ayub. So the next presentation actually and the speaker is Dr. Elham Bahman Teimouri. She is a lecturer at the University of Auckland. Also, she is a co-director of Theory and History Hub, and also she's leading a smart economy lab at the Digital Research Hub, University of Auckland. Ellie, the floor is yours. Please start your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mohsen. Hello, everyone. Let me share my screen. My presentation is about the result of my research, evaluating the impact of digital economy on land use planning. And I've done the research based on the fund that I received from the University of Auckland. So in my presentation, I want to talk about the relationship actually between economic crisis, because I'm an urban economist. So I want to explain the results of my research about the connection between the impact of digital economy, urban land use planning, and also economic crisis, and what is helpful about the economic crisis. I present the result in three discussion series. So that is actually a kind of dialogue between universalism and particularism. I will explain what that means. So the first part is about the theorizing a framework about the emergence of digital economies or digital platform economies. It means different types of platforms that we are using for our everyday life, and that is more common after the pandemic, of course, and how they are related to economic crisis, not just one, but in general, capitalist economic crisis. And the second part of my discussion is about planning responses as a particular response to the crisis and to the emergence of digital economies. And the third part of my discussion is about a kind of a hypothesis that I want to suggest to describe digital economies or digital platforms. Even each of the research or responses to the pandemic can be considered as one mode of digital economy. So I will explain that how we are experiencing, just because of the capitalist crisis, we are experiencing a faster circle of emergence, growth, and diminishing return for different platforms, digital platforms. Let's start with the objectives of the famous objectives of Sustainable Development Goals, or SDGs, as we know. We think that digital platforms and digital economies, they're supposed to help us as a part of solutionism to find solution for the problems that we have. For example, to end the poverty, to promote sustainable cities, to contribute to the economic growth, and to help with the employment, increase the employment rate. And also, for example, we want to facilitate the supply chain to facilitate consumption and production patterns in the city, or just as it is very popular at the moment, we want to contribute to the climate actions against climate changes in the world, that we all are worried about it. But everything in digital platforms and digital economies is about, I can say, two approaches of economy. Keynesianism and Schumpeterianism. If you look at this circle of economies, the first John Maynard Keynes and then Joseph Schumpeter, that was the Minister of Economics in Austria, they suggested circle of economy, that is, it went back to another economist in anti-Marxist economists in the Soviet Union. And they argue that capitalism experienced different waves. And as you see here, we are here. So it means even many years ago, 10 years ago, before the pandemic, before the economic crisis in supply chains and pandemic crisis, we knew that we have an economic downturn here. And even we knew that economists, based on simulation and modeling, they knew that we will experience an economic crisis just because of the lack of investment in health and education. This is what we knew about that. But how economists can predict this economic crisis and how we can deal with them? Again, it goes back to the Keynesianism and post-Keynesianism and Schumpeterianism. And both of them, Keynes and Schumpeter, they used Marxian approach. Capitalism cannot exist without constantly revolutionizing the instruments of production. And as a result, the relation of the production and the relations in the society. That is, I can say, related to what Manfredo at the beginning of the seminar explained. So with every new digital economy, we have new relations in the society. And then Schumpeter said that we experience business cycles and periods of boom and bust, economic falls and down. And the result is poverty, unemployment, crisis in health, education, and other type of crisis. And that's why we need a process of creative destruction to destroy the previous modes of production, to destroy the previous platforms and innovative platforms and mode of economies, and suggest something new to overcome the previous crisis. So this is what we are doing in reality through these smart cities and digital economies. But in the particular, that was the universal approach to the problem. In the particular context and particular platforms and digital economies, we can investigate how planning regulations, design codes, and zoning policies and strategies, they are dealing with this creative destruction and with the emergence of the platforms. For example, in the case that I was looking at, I analyzed the particular cases of short-term rental accommodations, and I try to understand how planning in different cities around the world, they have dealt with the new platforms. They have different strategies. For example, in a wide range of from prohibition of the new platforms, and some of them they are totally banned in some of the cities and countries around the world, and some limitations. For example, even different cities in Netherlands, they set different regulations to deal with these new platforms, emerging and new disruptive platforms. And even some of them, they try to, in some cities, they planning regulations and design codes, they decided to have more liberal approach, and through open market approach, they try to accept it. Although with the pandemic, we can see the problem actually has changed. And then at the end of my research, based on my observation and investigation through different platform economies, and also through case study, through particular cases, I realized that I can devise a new theoretical approach. So I see every platform, every digital economy, every model of digital economy that we use, it's doomed to a similar destiny, emerging a stage, growing a stage, and finally diminishing return and evaporating. So at the first stage, it is very popular to use Skype, Zoom, and Microsoft Teams. And we need some changes in the zoning plans, rules, and regulations. We need to think about changes in the probably merging working place and residential places. And then they are becoming more popular around the world. But when we accept them and when we regulate them and they become part of the normal life, then we have a diminishing return. We have a new economic crisis. For example, pandemic, that itself is a symptom of failure of neoliberalism, and not really the cause. It's a symptom of the failures in previous failures. And then we need a new technology that should emerge and boost the economy. So capitalism needs these innovations. And of course, this can be a new approach to politics as well. I mean, political actions and strategies are responsive to this type of, boom and bust in economy. For example, if you look at the emission economy and the Green New Deal, that is very attractive about a US Congresswoman and very famous, Ocasio-Cortez. Actually, she received advice from from one of the famous economists, Mazzucato, that is about dealing with the failure of capitalism and how we can set new missions to deal with these failures. So this is my suggestion. We need to see each objectives here and also dealing with the problems, providing solutions for the problems like pandemic, or if we just want to accept pandemic as a part of our normal life, we need to see them in the process and in the through the wave of falls and down in the economic activities and productivity. And if we cannot understand this, how each platform economy is related to one of the waves of economic downturn and economic crisis, probably we cannot help to find a solution, a real solution to that problem that we are supposed to solve. Thank you, everyone. That is my presentation that was related to economic crisis.
Thank you very much, Ellie, for your interesting presentation, especially regarding to the smart economy, economics one. So the last presentation, it's my presentation. So it's based on the book chapter I wrote for APRU Routledge handbook, and so it's just refer to what I did. So just to introduce myself, I'm Mohsen Mohammadzadeh. I'm the Director of Urban Planning Program at the University of Auckland, and I'm a member of the Future Cities Hub. And I'm collaborating with the APRU around the 3-4 years so far. So, so just to start my presentation for today. So it's one of the area of my interest, actually. I'm working on the disruptive mobility, and to see to what extent the emerging technologies regarding transportation assist us actually to achieve our sustainable goals, especially SDGs. So I raise this question: does this kind of the disruptive mobility drives kind of the sustainability, or maybe going to the wrong direction? So it's one of my concerns. So I look into the couple of the technologies, and they are changing our cities and also the pattern of using it, transportation, using for mobility. So first, when I'm speaking about disruptive mobility, I'm speaking about the kind of the product or kind of the service, is create a kind of the new market or kind of the value network here. And at the same time, it's weaken and transform or destroy the pre-existing product or market and category of the industry we had in the past. For example, if you look to the just the technologies we are using nowadays, like Netflix. If you remember, a couple of years back, we had the videos and video type of networks, and then we need to go to the place. So Netflix kind of replaced the pre-existing ones. Or when we are speaking about the Facebook, how the Facebook or Airbnb or other ones, change the way we live, we use the technology, and destroy it, or even totally put the pre-existing technology outside. And so another good example here, and it's in New York, in the early of the last century, and you can see that in the in the 1919s, if you had just one, automobile, and after 13 years, we have no horses. So technology replaces, and it's quite fast, and also change all kind of the pre-existing type of mode of actions here. So when I'm speaking about the disruptive mobility, I'm speaking about this kind of the technology and how it's changed all aspects of the life. When we look to the mobility ones, we had it before, it are reflects of the history we had regarding industrialization. In that case, when we had the first stage of industrialization, for example, we have railways and the steam engine, and we have a kind of the first stage of suburbanization, especially some development, developed out of the kind of the city borders at that time, and the kind of generate new opportunities for people to go outside the cities, because it's changed the kind of the meaning of the time and the distance at that period of time. And then especially after assembly line and 1940, you know, in the early of 20th century, when the car ownership become quite popular because assembly line make it quite affordable for people. We have a new pattern of the urban form shaped, you know, based on the car ownership. So they were kind of changing the pre-existing industries, but at the same time create a kind of the new urban pattern here. And most of the problems, you know, based on my research, most of the problems we have so far, they are coming from the pre-existing the disruption mobilities, you know, and that transform our cities historically. So we are facing now. So my question was that actually the emerging ones will have the same consequence for us, or they will help us actually to mitigate this kind of the issues we had so far. So it's a kind of the problems. You know, it's quite interesting if you hear that, for example, in the context of Auckland, the place I'm in the city I'm living, we have major problems regarding traffic, and especially in the peak hours. And we have a quite small, we are population here 1.5 or 1.6 million here, but traffic is a kind of the issue. So because we have a kind of the, you know, increasing the population and also huge demand regarding the transportation. So it's created a kind of the problem. So it's created a kind of the, especially among the colleagues, you know, in transport planning and transport engineering, the new technology can help us, you know, to address the problems that we have regarding traffic here. Especially when we look to the kind of SDGs, you know, in SDGs, they refer to the sustainable transport, you know, especially in the 7 SDGs, you know, pathways and also regarding targets. So it can help us regarding to address regarding issues like food security, health, energy, economic growth, infrastructure, city and human settlements, and they directly refer to the kind of sustainable transport. And UN Advisory Group actually work on it. In the 2016, they published a report how we can achieve the sustainable transport, you know, to especially achieve the SDGs here. But most of the time, when we look to the kind of the SDGs, you know, they were quite positive regarding emerging technologies, and but they look to the transport as a kind of the and technology and transportation as a one individual factor. But as a planner who looks at the different dimensions of transportation, I don't look at the transport as something quite different from the other dynamics we have in the city. So we have this kind of emerging technologies. You know, here we have electric cars invested a lot. We have, for example, even in New Zealand, we subsidize electric vehicles. The government subsidizes the electric vehicles. We have a shared platforms, and also we invested a lot on autonomous vehicles. So it's created kind of the positive, and they assume that this kind of technology can help us actually to address the issues we have. But most of the time, they look at the transportation and mobility as a separated issue from the other problems we have. Especially they assume that, you know, the kind of the disruptive mobility create a kind of the lower travel cost for us, and also create a kind of the changing the perception of the driving here, and also adding a new demands for traveling. For example, when you sit in the kind of autonomous car, you can do what you like, you know, and you can enjoy the life here. So so in that case, also it seems that actually the electric cars in long term, they will be quite cheaper to operate. And also the people like people they have disabilities, elderly people, even the kids can use car and book the car when they need it. So they create a kind of the more demands in the market for transportation. So it can help us to achieve some of the goals we have here. But at the same time, for example, in the context of Auckland, we have another problem, a housing issue. You know, Auckland is one of the most unaffordable cities in the world regarding housing. And as you can see, you know, the price of the housing rising up quite significantly. So we have 2 solutions for it. You know, one of the solutions is that going for a kind of the greenfield development and expansion. It's exactly what we had, you know, in the past. So it can be kind of I was thinking, okay, it's a kind of the solution we are using now. We are releasing more greenfield development. What about the using a new technology, especially regarding to kind of disruptive mobilities. When I look to the kind of the housing price here, I think that, I tested that, and checked with the people based on my research. And I asked people if they want to go and live further, if they can own a house, because if you go outer city, and kind of more greenfield, obviously you need to drive longer. But if the time is not the factor, because you can do your work and you can do what you like, and also it will be cheaper to use, for example, EV, that case, then people will like to go outer and live in the kind of more greenfield type of development in the future, because it's kind of promised cheaper housing, isn't it? So there is at least two different scenarios. When I looked at the technologies, so I did investigation in the context of Auckland regarding to the possibilities regarding to disruptive mobilities. Obviously, one scenario is what we did in the past, obviously created kind of more opportunities to go further for further greenfield development, and using green, especially agricultural lands and fertile lands we have around the city to develop more residential areas. It's exactly what happened during the different waves of the using disruptive mobility in the past. For example, when we had a train and later on we had a car. Auckland is one of the lowest low-dense cities in the world as well. So more likely we'll go for that direction, which is not necessarily help us actually to be kind of sustainable. And so it's a kind of the danger. The disruptive mobility, it's a kind of creating kind of the further greenfield development. And based on the messages we are hearing from the local government and central government, they are considering the actual capacity of the disruptive mobility to go for the greenfield development. Is it, for example, Brewery is one of the new development area, as you can see in the south of Auckland. They want to develop it, for residential ones. So, but on the other hand, another scenario we can deploy is that actually we allocate a lot of spaces for parking, especially in the metropolitan centers, and we can reclaim them for intensification. So I did a calculation about the existing land and can be reclaimed in different parts of the Auckland for especially metropolitan centers to provide more housing. And because they are quite close to public transport and they are quite well connected to the CBD and other service amenities, it means that we can save travel and also provide a less, and cheaper houses, in that kind of areas. So in that case, the most important aspects of the disruptive mobility would not be the technology itself, but the way we are using them. If we don't have any kind of plans and policies and we don't put it in the right way, more likely the technology and the disruptive technology regarding transportation will guide us to the wrong direction. But if we implement it in the right way, hopefully we'll have a better outcome at the end of the after following this. So I think planning and policy making and the right urban design and landscape, it's very crucial here. So it's kind of the message we need to pass to the decision makers regarding to the especially deploying and utilization of these disruptive mobility technologies. Thank you very much for your attention, and it's my presentation for today. And I'm happy to answer the questions, regarding my presentation and also regarding the other ones. So I can see there are two actually questions, one for Professor Chishma Zangi, Ali. So I think you can see that it would be appreciated if you respond to this, Ali. Are you there? The first question from Nayu.
I will clear.
So is the first question is for you. You see the question, Ali?
Hello?
Hi, Ali. You see the question for the first question is for you?
Can I?
And so I can read it for you. If the question is that the high-rise buildings are the landmarks of the smart cities. According to your experience, there is a crowded inhabitants in such a building, and it also causes to outbreak the virus easily. Do you have any idea to design the building which can help to reduce the spreading such a virus in future? Ali, are you with us? So I will go to Ali. I think Ali can respond to the question. I will pass it to him, and he can write later on. Ali, the next question is for you. Sounds like government will not be able to cope with digital disruption too fast for larger rapid. Pardon?
Thanks. Yes, I can see the question, and I think I have answered the question. I wrote the answer to the question, and also I see that Ali also answered the question that one of the audience asked. So I'm sure the question received their answers. So if it is necessary, explain more, but I just generally explain that. Then again, it is about particularism and universalism. For each particular context, we have different operation of government, local government, and also different platforms. We need to deal separately. There isn't any general answer to all the cases. That was my answer. Yes.
Yep. I've also, can you hear me now?
Yes. Yes. Thank you.
I've also answered the question, mainly touching on adaptive measures that could be applied, perhaps in design, as well as perhaps looking into, one of the things which we have looked into is to avoid, for example, having shared building services, such as, in high-rise buildings, we can have more cores for buildings so that we can have more access to the buildings, different levels, if they are often they are multi-use, of course. And as well as one of the things which we have touched on as a potential paradigm shift, which was published in, I think, Journal of Urban Management a few months ago. And one of them was on not having big shared, let's say, building services, such as like air conditioning units, which I think was something which was also studied quite extensively in cities in China at that time, especially at the beginning of the pandemic.
Thank you very much, Ali. Thank you for your response. Another question is for me. Actually, thanks, Sandra, for your question. It's quite interesting. The local government here, they didn't actually consider my, I posted to them. They read it, but at the same time, they are looking to more economic benefits through the further greenfield development things. So sometimes, it's a kind of the issue. They know that. They know about the capacity. They want to have and to use it somehow, but at the same time, because of the some economic benefits through the further greenfield development, I'm not sure to what extent they will use that kind of information regarding to planning and policy making. But we are in touch with them. I'm working with the local government, central government regarding that one, and especially I did this project based on the MDIE. Fund, which is the Ministry of Business, Innovation and Career in New Zealand and Employment. Yeah. So I informed them, but I'm not sure to what extent they will use it. Thank you. Any other question for you guys?
Well, maybe I can pick up on the question that was answered by Ellie. And I think that one interesting thing that probably we can expand on is on that particular condition in which we are at the moment placed with what we call platform capitalism. So, and that's exactly one of those things that is particularly worrying me, because I'm, as I showed you, interested in social media, but it's particularly worrying at the larger scale. So When I'm looking at, for instance, the question of retail and those particular centers I was talking about, then immediately we understand that the creative distraction that Schumpeter made famous in terms of interpretation of the crisis, or the internal crisis of capitalism. Actually, Schumpeter was on the other side, but anyway, on the other side of the critique that we are doing now, not on the other side in general. And what it is happening is that essentially we are assisting at an incredible polarization. And we know perfectly that this polarization is absolutely devastating, not only at the level in which it is happening. So for instance, one of the major reasons why there is this change and the variation in the organization of the retail service, the retail system and sector, is essentially because of its digitalization. So essentially the online retail is creating major issues to whatever it is that was originally traded in brick and mortar facilities. So what is happening is that the shopping malls are adapting and they are offering a completely different kind of services, a completely different kind of facilities than the old shopping malls. What are these facilities? Well, they're picking up on something else. What are they doing? They are entering in a new dimension, in new areas, which they can essentially financialize, that were not financialized previously. So for instance, I have a student who is a PhD candidate and at how some particular businesses, and in this case, in her case, the main application is on the coffee houses, have become something else and have started entering in a dimension which is the domestic one. So essentially they are starting to replace, or in a way, outphase or somehow become precede whatever it is that we understand, conceive and develop as a dimension, domestic dimension, with their own models. And the major case would be probably Starbucks, who has as motto, the slogan was exactly at home, away from home. So they are doing something that I was mentioned before, George Ritzer, in that particular question, the presumption, the production and consumption combined. And he was the one who wrote the famous book on the mechanization of society. And this is exactly what we are seeing here. So what I was telling is that this particular way in which those platform capitalism are operating is a system that is becoming not only particularly worrying in each and every single dimension, but it becomes an incredibly important dimension. We know it because now, for instance, there's the big question of whether or not we have to find a way of taxate the big tech in a proper way instead of leaving it open to particular local government that can, of course, minimize or even get rid of whatever it is, the minimum which we propose. We're talking about 15%, which is, of course, already a very low taxation. But anyway, what is happening is that they're becoming monopolists, and we see it very well. The problem here, and we heard a second ago, is exactly when, and this was in the talk given by Job, is when all of a sudden we realize that we are losing the capacity to really understand what is happening in those domains. Yes, of course, 5G and new technologies help also with preventing the diffusion of some particular viruses, and we've seen it now with the pandemic. But what is the flip side of this? And we know it quite perfectly. Where is the control? Who is controlling it? To be very honest, I don't understand how is it possible that a company, like in this case, the one managing Facebook, Instagram, and others, is able to stop a prominent person like Donald Trump to talk. Not that I want here Donald Trump, but I cannot understand how is it possible that we have a system of public realm, of actually the public sphere, which is completely escaping the control of whatever it is that we understand as common. So that's the point I was trying to make, and to wrap up the discussion around the question of how we as public, like we as demos, are able to look at this areas and try to get a better understanding of how only sectorial, not only in a particular area, is actually becoming absolutely comprehensive.
Thank you, Manfredo. That was interesting. But I totally agree. But as the interesting question mentioned, the point is that we have different actors in terms of, smart cities and digital economies concepts. As you said, we have monopolies, we have private sectors, public sectors, and different actors. They are involved and they react differently to the new emerging platforms and different modes of digital economies. So definitely we have monopolies, and it means having more monopolies in the economy. It means definitely less power for the public, for the people, for the ordinary people. And this is the pattern that is, I think, to me, is matter of worrying, especially in terms of financial dimension of smart cities and digital economies, specifically when we know because of the level of debt, we are moving to use more cryptocurrencies in our economies, and it is more popular. It is getting more attention at the moment, using tokenism for art. Now it is very popular at the moment. So I think it will be more problematic in the near future, and specifically in terms of those monopolies and those people who have power. They are getting more power. It doesn't matter they are a liberal, Democrats, Republican, or Labor, or Green. The problem will be with the digital economies. Those people who are powerful, they are getting more power through digital platforms and social media. That will be the challenge, I think. Thanks. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, everyone. If there is no, I don't see any new question. If there is no question here, we can close the event and webinar. And thanks everyone for joining us. And thank you very much for all speakers, to join us. It's a quite different time, and it was quite challenging for a couple of the colleagues, especially for Ali and for Ayub, because it's quite early morning for them. So thank you very much for your time and contribution. Manfredo, you want to close the event today, please? Thank you.
Yes. So yeah, thank you very much to everybody, and I think you already wrapped up. All I want to do is to invite our public to take part of the future events of our webinar series, and particularly the coming up, as Yekang reminded at the beginning. And the next one will be exactly on urban sanitation and the sustainable development goals, the role of container-based sanitation. So you can register online. It will take place in 10 days from now, on 13th of December. It's a bit an inconvenient time if you are in New Zealand, because it will be midnight, but in other parts of the world, and we know very well the situation, because we have been for more than 1 year, 1.5 years in this situation of working at nighttime. But I'm sure that in other parts of the world, it will be way more accessible. So thank you very much to everybody, and see you soon in the next events. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks. Bye.